I think something important is not to put all your eggs into one basket. I think that's a strength of this region, that is very diversified. It has manufacturing, it has services, it has a wide productive base. And some of the lessons that we see from the financial crisis is that some places that were not diversified suffered, consequently very, very large. We were in the north of Sweden, in regions that were very specialized in mining, also in Chile, and their full economy depends on changing external conditions. And that's not a very wise way to put your development path, depending on somebody else, because if these change, so does your economy. So it's about trying to find a sustainable growth path that is more resilient to these shocks, because the outlook is very, very uncertain. We experienced the global financial crisis, but you have all kinds of predictions of this is just the beginning of many others to come. So I think it's very important to try to find out ways that you can do these kinds of things that were discussed before. For example, trying to find out ways that the manufacturing can start to transfer their knowledge into other types of sectors, that these people communicate, that the economic base is highly diversified too into different areas, so that when something changes from the outside, it doesn't really affect you. Actually, this coming Monday, we're going to go to Ireland. And Ireland is a very interesting case study of a place that grew very, very quickly, but then it was hit very, very strongly too, because mainly they focused on one key area. They weren't able to diversify. And that's also a valuable lesson, to have this longer time frame in mind, not being short-sighted, where's the next quarterly growth happening, but have a strategy that is robust and sound. I think that's an important element to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Which is true. Do we take a laser-like focus on enterprise needs, or do we take a broader focus on the needs of the city region, which may be as important for future economic growth as focusing on enterprise development? So do we talk about the strategic issues that Enrique saw as interesting, and the OECD research picked up as necessary to develop? And how do you do that? Do we think strategically in the LEP, given the limited resources? Is that a necessary thing to do, or is it mission creep?
Right.
How do we handle that?
Okay, thank you very much. Laser-like or the broad view, Neil?
Broad laser, perhaps. I think, I mean, this was a very live discussion at the board. You know, in some ways, and life is never this black and white, but you know, we had the discussion, do we go absolutely laser-like on a small number of sectors and say, well, ultimately the rest will benefit, the rest will catch up, and just forget about those, let them look after themselves? In a region as diverse and complex as this, that I think would be, without being too evocative, economic and social suicide. You simply could not take that absolutely myopic, in one sense, laser-like in another, view of the economy. So yes, there is a clear prioritization that we spoke of this morning in terms of identifying, supporting and developing those sectors where we think the greatest growth can be achieved for the benefit of the whole region. Part of that growth path is within purely those sectors. Part of it will spread out. But we also have to look, we have to be realistic and say there is a much broader economy here, but both in pure economic terms and geographically. So we have to give support and direction and encouragement to those areas as well. Life is not as simple as laser-like or the rest. It's got to be a combination of both, but we should not lose focus where we can achieve the greatest benefit.
Do you agree with that, Enrique?
I think it's not an either-or question. I wouldn't define it as a trade-off or a decision between one or the both. I think they go both hand in hand. In fact, they should come hand in hand. In that sense, I would like to make a point in terms of thinking of economic development and the provision of goods and services, which are two different elements. You do want to spread out education, healthcare, these kinds of universal goods and services across the entire territory. But when it comes to economic development, that's a different story. And I think there should be decisions taken on specific either places or players. That should be done with some sort of coherence and guidance, but that cannot be spread out across the entire territory. I think there's the process of economic growth is driven by, it's a very complex one, and as far as much as we want to put equations to it, it's also partly trying to develop a dynamic environment where people can interact, share ideas, compete, and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't happen. That's how the process of innovation works. So you want to work on the sort of like the broad framework conditions that give rise to this type of environment, but not necessarily go against a particular winner. I think that's good for the region itself. I don't know if that makes sense or that answers to your question. But.
Thanks, Mark.
I think just very briefly, I'm cognizant of where the question came from. I think on a very practical basis, we have to look at the resources we have in our region, and specifically our institutes of higher education, and see how we can actually tap into those institutes of higher education to develop our business sectors that we are, at the moment, doing well within the region. As a business, we've just won the East of England Award for the Best University Institute of Higher Education Business Research and Development Project, and we're in a national final next month. And that has been done by a close relationship with, in this particular case, Sheffield Hallam, and look at their skill set, look at our skill set, and see how the two match. And I think also it's important that the institutes of higher education now do look very much at the region and see how they can actually structure their courses to meet the demands of the region. I've just did some external validation on the MSc course at Leeds Met on engineering. It's the first master's course they put on in 10 years, but the demand has come to Leeds Met for a master's course, a postgraduate course in engineering, and there wasn't one established at this moment in time. So the university reacted very, very quickly and said, we need one on board to address the needs of the region. And that's the kind of cooperation, that's the kind of responsiveness that we need, and that's how we'll gear up the assets we have in the region to deliver on a ground level.
Great, thanks. Probably time for one very brief question. Yeah, gentlemen here, we'll get you a microphone as quickly as we can. Got two people racing to you. We'll see who gets there first. Thank you, you won.
Mick Milner, I'm a local manufacturer. We've talked about exports and how important exports will be and are, but shouldn't we also be looking at how we can reduce imports? And so we've got local production for local consumption. If you think of the efforts we could make in reducing the amount of material we bring into the region from overseas and produce it internally, we could make a bigger impact on the economy than trying to double our exports by from 5% to 10%, and thus make a bigger impact on the economy locally.
That's a good point Mick makes, Mark, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's one or two things we need to establish first of all. By imports, we're not talking about inward investment. I think inward investment, and UKTI is focusing very much on inward investment, is very important. Even though they may be foreign-owned companies, they're actually supporting a regional supply chain. And I know that's not the point you're making, but I think it's just important to clarify that issue. When you start putting tariff barriers into international trade, you've always got the possibility of repercussions from those people you basically want to export to. So there are repercussions, and nothing can be done in isolation. And also, we are finding statistically, I know the Engineering Employers Federation just produced some stats on this recently, that out of those people who actually offshored over the last 10 years, over recent years, 1 in 7 has actually onshored again. So I think the market forces, which show necessarily the overhead you have to import, you have to apply to actually manage international supply chains, the safety stock you've got to carry in order to ensure that you don't have any quality issues when you're actually buying product from abroad, to substitute that which you may have previously sourced in the UK, is not all plain sailing. There are big issues there, and we're seeing a reverse in the trend. So I think the market forces are acting against the problem that you're actually specifying there. And whilst on paper it sounds a good idea, I'll be very reticent about any form of government tariff barrier on imports and protecting the free market within which we thrive. Oh yeah, fully agree with that. And I had the opportunity of speaking to the Minister last night about the importance of investment in manufacturing, capital allowances, apprenticeship schemes. the issues we've got regarding finance, export credit guarantees, all these issues are really big items on the agenda. And not wanting to go onto too high a level, the government's got an issue. The banks aren't making much money from lending money. And also at the moment, there is a big perception of risk in small, medium-sized enterprises. So there is a big problem in terms of banks lending to small, medium-sized enterprises to invest. And also from the government's point of view, capital allowances that will allow us to invest are something which they look upon at the moment in time with caution, because obviously larger companies have been using it in the past for tax avoidance. So many, many big issues which are inflamed or amplified by obviously the restriction in cash we have floating around at the moment in time.
Neil?
Yeah, I think at a relatively micro level, I think without introducing trade barriers and without upsetting too many people around the rest of the UK, there is an area that we can look at, and that is more localized supply chains. You know, there are lots of businesses in this city region whose supply chains are dotted around the UK, and I'm not suggesting that, you know, we create barriers around the city region, but I think there can be sometimes more intelligence brought to localized supply chains, and part of that is also talking to other small businesses to help them understand what the opportunities are, to whom they should be supplying. You know, again, it's a lot to do with bringing people together and understanding where we can work better together.
Mike, do BCC share that view?
Well, I just wanted to make one point, really. I mean, apart from the local measures that Neil outlined, I think there is a problem with trade, which is the diminution of support at the national level. I mean, we've seen in the comprehensive spending review something like a 20% budget cut for UKTI over the next 3 years. Now, what that means is fewer businesses being supported. It means the support they do get is less than it would otherwise have been. It puts more pressure on the staff that already exist at UKTI and makes their job harder. And actually, there's a lot to be done in terms of how we focus the support that is available, making sure that small businesses in particular don't get crowded out by, I know, too much of a focus on supporting large companies. And that's something that we've argued for a while at the BCC. The other thing is just picking up on a point that was made earlier. In terms of some of the support that surrounds trade finance, for example, and the new products that have been brought out by the Export Credits Guarantee Department, we do need nationally to move beyond a situation where schemes are announced. So we have 4 new products that have come out from ECGD. And then there's the Enterprise Finance Guarantee for Exports as well. And these schemes tend to be announced, but then there's no follow-through in terms of how businesses on the ground can access those through their intermediaries, like their bankers, their accountants, and so on. That kind of last mile in the development of trade finance products is a real weakness in the national setup and needs to be addressed, actually.
Right. Okay, thanks. Enrique, any final point from you?
No, just, I mean, you mentioned the word productivity, how to make the firms more productive, and we're down to the main elements that you need to improve if you want to be productive, which is human capital. And I think in this context, it's not just about getting people go through the universities, but also establishing good links between the universities and the business sector. It's about how can they adapt to the changing local conditions, and how can the businesses and the universities have a good interaction in this process. So I fully agree with the comments of the small and medium-sized enterprises in the relevance of the region, but I think it's critical that looking forward, these things enter into the planning process too. I mean, they have to go in combination. Those are the keys to receiving high levels of productivity. And of course, that's how those are some of the main elements when we look about innovation, that I touched upon before, but I'll leave it like that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've been beaten by